alley that it sits in, so it's ridden. All in all, welcome back to another day off. This is Ed's 3 Series. It's an E92 with an N52 engine. He was referred to me by Kirk in the family, whose E46 I tuned up a couple videos back. He said it had a dead battery, it was making a squealing noise, there's an apparent coolant leak, and he just wanted an overall status check on the car. So we're going to be inspecting it, diagnosing it, repairing it, and I'm going to be showing you some killer ways to save time and money when it comes to repairing these N52s. We'll show you all the common culprits, so stick around, let's get after it. Battery type this has, it can be either standard lead acid or an AGM. Thank goodness it's not an E93 because those batteries are way worse. Now we don't need to take it out completely yet, but there's these metal tangs here on this junction, and if you pop these out, you can usually lift up on this enough to get to the battery label. I should just need a standard H7 battery. I'm looking for a date code. Not seeing anything on it yet. Owner said the battery's about 4 years old, so we're gonna just assume it needs replacing anyways. I couldn't get the car fired back up after I drove it home 10 miles. First step, we're gonna pull these T20s out for the air intake duct. Tabs are still good. Usually people over torque them and break them off. If you run those in too tight, you'll just snap these tangs off of the air intake duct. Tab up, pull that connector out. DC this air box. Now we got some more room. I know lighting's been difficult to see, so we're going to use this little snap-on light today for the inspection. Valve cover's starting to seep a little bit down there on the side. You can see some oil pooling up down into the ignition coil down in there, so we'll definitely have to make a note of that. Those coils are starting to swim a little bit. Other than that, I think it's coming strictly just from that oil cap. Maybe we can rectify that. Everything else on this side is looking good so far. All right, so here's the real juice on the car, guys. This upper radiator hose has a leak down here. I haven't pressure tested it, but we will. But what I discovered yesterday inspecting the car was this belt is beginning to fray right here. And if you look throughout the engine bay, you can see belt material kind of scattered around. Luckily, it hasn't spit it yet. However, this is the belt tensioner right here. It's a mechanical style. Now, if you can imagine this tube of silicone as the tensioner, this is the pulley, right? This is a spring that causes the tensioner to stay tensioned. It's a giant metal spring, and as it wears out, this pulley starts to lean forward. As it leans forward, that belt starts to walk off of the idler pulley. As the belt starts to walk off, it rubs and makes contact with the harmonic balancer on the crank pulley there, starting to fray the belt. In addition to that, as the belt starts to fray and spin around with RPMs, those belt fibers are whipping the bottom of this upper radiator hose, thus causing a leak down on the bottom. This oil filter housing is also leaking from the bottom of the gasket, and the oil is starting to push and saturate the bottom of this upper radiator hose. You can see all this built up belt material, oil, gunk. This rubber is starting to swell directly behind this coupling, so it's sort of a 2 to 3 prong approach up here on the front end. We're looking at one issue that's causing a second issue and is also being affected by a third issue, which is the oil filter housing. So this is going to be the main focus of our visit this trip. We're going to need a new tensioner, we're going to need a new belt, a new upper radiator hose, in addition to the expansion tank hose that runs over there to the bottle. And we're also going to need to reseal this oil filter housing while we're in there. So coolant hoses, belt, tensioner, and gasket. I'll do my best to show you, but there's also lots of evidence down there that the oil filter housing is leaking. You can see on the side of the block, there's oil pooling up, and that's all from this oil filter housing gasket. All that air is getting pushed backwards, all that oil's blowing underneath the intake manifold. Not to mention, look at the alternator here. You can see all the wire inside. It's starting to get oil saturated. You can see all this belt material on the front side of the alternator here. This car definitely needs an engine clean. If you ever take the airbox out, don't ever lose this little rubber snubber. It'll cause the airbox to sit loose. But anyways, this oil filter housing is making a mess. So in addition to doing the repairs, we're also going to need to do an engine clean and a degrease on this with the pressure washer, which I don't mind. That's why I bought it. But yeah, lots of evidence of oil leaks down here on the front end. It's getting pretty well caked up. So that's definitely a majority of our issue this trip. Other items, CBS is showing that we're due for a brake fluid flush since 2021. So we'll probably recommend that. Test out the new brake bleeder kit. CHF11S, it's a little bit low. Fluid's okay, it's a pukey green, it's definitely milky. We should probably flush it. However, it's not my priority this trip. I'd rather make sure the car drives down the road well first besides doing preventative maintenance items. Everything else here is looking pretty good so far. I love these engines. They're really reliable. They're really good. They just have a couple common culprits that you have to address on them. But other than that, the front end's looking pretty good. We're going to need to put some pressure inside the cooling system to make sure that that upper radiator hose is our only leak. However, I assume it's just going to start spilling its guts. There may be leaks elsewhere, but we won't know until we get a nice tight cooling system and get this upper hose replaced first. Front right tire, we're sitting about 4 millimeters on the outside tread, slight feathering on the outside of the tire. Brakes are at 5 mil inside and outside. So overall, we're looking at about 5 to 6 millimeters on brake life all the way around the vehicle, inside and outside pads. Front tires are at 4 millimeter. Rear tires are just under 2 millimeters. So definitely need to rotate or replace those rear tires as soon as possible. Now this is a 328XI, so the front end's going to be a little bit different. It's going to have the all-wheel drive package. Definitely a lot harder to work down under here. Luckily we're not doing the oil pan gasket or anything today. There's definitely some saturation. Hard to say what it's coming from until we get a pressure wash done on the vehicle. The skid plate's in the way too. However, I think it's relatively clean under here. I'd like to just get it cleaned off first and then we can go from there on the next visit. Well, I did my due diligence and I looked over the rest of the car. The oil pan's looking good, trans pan's looking good, control arm bushings are nice and tight. I could feel them while I was driving, so I think I got a pretty good list compiled up. I'll give you a look at what we're looking at so far. We have a battery with an H7 standard lead acid. We need an oil filter housing reseal without the cooler option. We need a serpentine belt plus a new tensioner, upper radiator hose plus expansion hose. Brake fluid flush was due in 2021. We're also trying to find an oil cap over at the parts store. So I'm going to jump inside, get some parts ordered up, and we'll keep going. Also, one last note about tires. I wanted to rotate these for Ed. I thought it would be really nice to do and throw in. However, these rear tires are 255/35 R18. Front tires are 225/40 R18. So this car has a staggered tire option, which means we cannot rotate those wider tires up to the front, skinnier tires back to the rear. They're going to need to be replaced in sets. Also, these are RFTs, which is a run flat tire, so they're going to be having a lot meatier of a sidewall. You can ride up to 50 miles on just the sidewall once you lose air. However, they're going to need to be replaced. We're not going to be able to rotate. Last but not least, I cannot confidently order this upper radiator hose until I pressure test the cooling system. So real quick, we're going to get the adapter on, throw some pressure in there, and confirm that that upper radiator hose is leaking. Throw our adapter on. Now if you're going to pressure test these cars, you're going to have different adapters. E46s and E90s are both different because their cooling system bottles are different. But you can find universal kits pretty cheap online. Just make sure it contains the adapters that you're looking for when you buy a kit. Just going to throw some quick pressure in. There she goes. There she is right there. Perfectly in line with that outside ridge of the belt. as it rides through the pulley system. So that is definitely sliced through by that belt from the tensioner failing without a doubt. Alright y'all, I got a parts list compiled. I went to Real OEM and went through schematics, found all the part numbers so I can help out the parts guys. Don't worry, I'll be doing another episode on exactly how I order parts, so stay tuned. I'll give you good details on that. As far as our list goes, we have an H7 battery, oil filter housing gasket number, tensioner plus the belt part number, upper radiator hose, expansion tank hose, oil cap, oil filter, and then BMW coolant. Alright y'all, we're back at it today. We got a box full of parts, new serpentine belt, tensioner kit, oil filter housing gasket, oil cap, expansion tank hose, upper radiator hose with nipple, some German coolant, an oil filter because we're doing the filter housing. With core charge, we're looking at roughly about $620 for all the parts to get this E92 rectified. Threw in these Rhino ramps because I've been having trouble with an approach angle on my other steel ramps. Anyways, let's get torn into this thing and get cracking. We got some work to do today. Alright, to start today off, I figure we'll get this oil filter popped out. We'll get the upper radiator hose taken off, the expansion tank hose, and we'll start on the oil filter housing. We'll do the tensioner while we're doing the housing because we'll be in the same area. Before we go too far on the oil filter housing, I want to extract as much coolant as I can out of here just to prevent mess. I also want to extract the rest of the oil out of this filter housing so it doesn't make as much of a mess when we do break it loose. We can pop our upper radiator hose off without making too much of a mess now. Now we have 3 bolts holding this on. We have one back here underneath the intake manifold, one here, one here. So I'm going to show you a trick how to get this off without having to pull the intake, because that's what the book recommends. That's what the labor rate is based off, is pulling the intake to get access to that bolt. Book time's about 4 hours. We can start just by breaking them loose. An E10 torque socket will work, but also what you can use is an 8mm 12 point. I like to use these as a E-Torx replacement. They bite really well and you're able to get wrenches into places where you normally can't. We're going to do the same thing for this lower bolt right here. I'm going to sneak this 8mm 12 point wrench in there to get some extra leverage, because this one's really hard to get. Normally you have to take this plastic coupling coolant hose that goes down to the thermostat, but you don't have to take it out. But in order to get this bolt out, we need to get the housing loose so we can shift it forward. If you try to take this bolt out all the way, it's going to hit this hose and you won't be able to remove it. So it's hard to see, but there's another E10 down there. I'm going to use this E10 wobble socket with this nice long 1/4 inch extension. I'm going to sneak down under here from the intake manifold, and I'm going to line it up with that socket. You kind of need a wobble socket here to get it off. So here you have a better view. You want to sneak this 1/4 inch extension down underneath the first intake runner and get your wobble socket fitted onto that E10. Now we can break that back bolt loose. And we can take this one all the way out. Just stick a hand back here and get a finger on the bolt so you don't drop it down below the intake manifold. There we go. That saves you several hours on this job just by having this wobble socket. Loosen up this front bolt, this top one. Now we want to get our 8mm 12 point wrench and get that back onto this bottom E10. And as we're going to back this out, We won't be able to back it out eventually. Our wrench will get stuck. But if we back it out as much as we can, and then we crack the housing loose, now we can push the housing up as we take that bolt out. Unbolt our other E10 up here. Get that all the way out. Now we have our oil filter housing removed, and we were able to get it completely out without having to remove any extra components. It's pretty flat. You can see it's sandwiched out over the valley that it sits in. Here and here, it's extremely common. I've done hundreds of these. Luckily, they're relatively easy to do on these N52s. But it's just flat. We have no more sealing surface. You can see all that oil bleeding out off the bottom end of it, pushing directly onto the upper hose. So definitely a necessary reseal. Now we can wipe her down. Now we can scrub it with some Scotch-Brite. Want to get any old evidence of the gasket off. Like I say in every video, we want a clean mating surface. Hi, Bumblebee. What's up, little buddy? Alright, clean it off one last time. Alright, normally I'd run this through a parts washer, but I don't have that luxury here in the shop, so we're going to just clean it up by hand. First thing we can do is pop this old gasket out, just a pocket screwdriver in here. Get a purchase point. Try to peel it out. I also like to take a wire brush and get in and scrape out all this residue. I just like it nice and clean. Clean mating surface. Not too bad. I'm going to give it one last squirt with a can of brake cleaner and a straw. Note it's a good idea to rough up this fitting for the upper radiator hose. It just gets some buildup, right? You can see a little bit of like etching there almost. Yeah, it's starting to etch in, which is pretty crazy. That's etched into the aluminum. Alright, we got our new gasket. I haven't used this brand before. It's what the parts store could get me in the time frame. At least it's Japanese. It's a Kibi gasket. We'll see what the quality looks like. So it's soft. Seems decent. I always use genuine BMW, but time was of the essence this time, so. Alright, new gasket. Get that fitted in. Now we need to look up torque specs for the housing and get this torqued back down to spec. If you over torque these, you'll just blow these gaskets out again, just like what happened on this one. So you want to be gentle and follow torque spec for this unit. Okay, our housing is cleaned up. We're ready to go back on. So again, make sure your gasket is completely seated. All right, and we'll get that test fit back down. First bolt we want to do is where it's going to be our short bolt to go down here. because we need to do it in exactly the reverse order. If this is snug down, there won't be enough room to get your bolt back in and get it lined up. So we'll get our first short bolt in. Had to clean it off real quick. Going to lift up and get this thread started. Great, now that that's in, we take our longer bolt, drop that down in, get that lined up. And then last but not least, we need our last bolt to sneak back down in here. I like to put it in by hand first. Again, go down past this intake runner, sneak it into the hole, and then again, I'll do my best to show you. We want to take this 1/4 inch extension with the E10 wobble, sneak it down underneath here between the intake runner and the oil filter housing. Okay, and then we want to bring it over to this bolt and get that lined up. So now we can fire up our torque wrench. It's a 3/8, but it'll work. We're doing 22 Newton meters. So I'm not going to torque that all the way. I just put about 12 Newton meters on it. I'm going to switch over to my wobble socket. We're going to feed this wobble socket back in. Whoops. So we got that wobble socket fitted back on. Going to torque this about the same, to about 12, because we want to do them equal. Alright, we got that started. Now I want to take my little 8mm wrench and put a little bit of torque on this bolt down here as well. Right, and this one I'm not torquing to spec. I just want to snug it down real quick. Now we can finish this back bolt. There's 22. You can torque the top bolt. It's 22. Then what I like to do for reference is I'll come up here to the top bolt with my 8mm wrench, and I know roughly how tight I need to get it in order to match that 22. And so I just get this one nice and snug. There we go. Snug enough with this shorty. So that's torqued, that's torqued, that's torqued. Can plug our sensor back in. Put the oil filter back in, connect our upper radiator hose, and oil filter housing is good to go. Now we can drop our new filter in. So we got this part of the upper radiator hose disconnected. Now we can go over to our radiator side, and we also have this other secondary coolant hose that connects onto the bottom of the upper. Pop that tab and just get a little bit of leverage. Try to get that connection broken loose. Sometimes these BMW coolant hose connections can be a bit finicky, and you got to beat them up a little bit. Just always be cognizant of the upper radiator hose neck. They're fragile. I've broken them before. It's not fun. So leverage is your friend. Maybe a mini pry bar so you can get in between the couplings, and there we go. So what I like to do is put it into the crack, right, and I'll twist sideways so I spread it like that. This bottom hose is off, so that's good to go. Now we need to get this upper radiator hose disconnected from the radiator. So again, we'll pop that top clip up. This is the very fragile part, so you got to be extra careful when you're doing this one. So I'll just go in and gently wiggle up and down. Nice. Luckily this car's low mileage, so it's not going to fight us. But once these turn brown, they just fucking weld themselves to the plastic. And check this out. I just took this upper hose off. Look what came off with it on the neck. Right? So this O-ring gets sandwiched by this piece of plastic, and these two fit down into the upper radiator hose. So this hose actually just came apart while we were removing it. Next, we come over here, pop this clip up. We'll just take it out because it wants to fight us. Apply a little bit of leverage. Boom. We have this whole upper radiator hose and vent hose removed. Ta-da. Alright, for this part, lube is your friend. So what we're going to do is take some Sil Glide, get that lubed up, and we want to hit every O-ring. The only one I really don't want to hit is this, because then it'll slide around a bit, but we could do some wet silicone. But take that Sil Glide, push it into all these couplings, connections, and O-rings. This hard plastic connection can need a little more, right? But these are going to fight you if you don't lube them, so I highly recommend you do. Get them all lubed up. Same with the receiving ends, right? Want to hit this. We want to hit the upper radiator neck, and we also want to hit this guy right here because this clips on to the bottom of the upper hose. Now that we've done that, we can road can. Well, hit it while the can's going crazy. Okay, I got it to stop. Cool. So now we have our lubricated O-ring on the upper radiator hose. You don't need to pull these clips, you can just push them on. So we'll start here with the radiator, line up our tabs, push the clip down here, line this tang up with the tab on the hose, push till it clips, and then this one here. Take it, bottom of the radiator hose, push, clip. Alright, those are all clipped in. Happy with that. Now we need to route the vent hose real quick. Alright, we got our new vent hose. So first we'll lube this end up real quick. See if the can goes rogue. Yep. Guys, we need some new silicone spray. Got a busted can. Look at that. She's busted. Alright, so this hose is lubed up. Hopefully it's the right one. Get that end clipped on. Wiggle it back and forth so it seats. Now we need to go underneath this fan harness. Okay? There's these clips up here on the fan shroud. Alright, now we're going to need a small size hose clamp, and we need to get this nipple mated to the expansion tank. Alright, we got a fresh hose clamp. We're going to slip this on. We're going to get our hose fitted down all the way so it's flush with the upper hose. Now, you want to be very careful installing this hose clamp because too much lateral torque, you can snap that nipple off the upper hose. So make sure we're on tighten. That's why I like this nut driver so much, because you don't get a lot of lateral torque like you would from a ratchet. I like to support it while I torque it down. All right, nice and tight. Do the spin test. It doesn't want to spin, so that's good. And that should be our coolant repair and our oil filter housing repair all buttoned up. Next thing we can go to is the tensioner in the belt. All right, hopefully you guys got a good view for this. We're going to need this T60. I use it on a 1/2-inch ratchet. We're going to fit this down into the slot on the tensioner, and you just want to pull it to the right, pop this belt off the tensioner, then you should be able to go completely slack, take that out. Next, we can start to take this belt off. So alternator, idler, power steering pump, and you can kind of pull, get some slack out. We need to get it off the AC compressor down here on the left. And now all that we're left with is just the crank pulley. All right, and the belt is out. So let's see. You can see how the belt was starting to fray. And I don't have any obvious fibers right now. However, you can see how this stuff would start to whip around and cut that lower radiator hose open. Let me show you that hose real quick too. Here's the old upper hose, and you can see there's some fibers right there. So that's where the hose got torn. And this distance off of this upper hose lines perfectly up with this alternator pulley. Alright, now we'll take a 3/8 ratchet with a E14 socket for the tensioner bolt. Now these bolts break too. I've seen them break. They're aluminum bolts. They're stretched to torque. Break this loose. Boom, and there's your tensioner. So you can see how as this wears out, this starts to lean forward. Look at the gap that the belt has been clearing on the pulley, and it's been coming up. So it's ridden, 2 millimeters, maybe 3 millimeters forward on the pulley. So here's our new E92 tensioner kit. It comes with the new tensioner and the new aluminum bolt. And it comes with this lock pin so you can get the belt routed, and when you're done, tension it, pop the pin, and you're ready to rock. But you can see how this would wear out from the spring, no doubt. Okay, so I remembered correctly. This is 25 Newton meters plus 90 degrees. This square tang has to mate up with this hole down here. So I'm going to drop this tensioner down. We're going to line that up with that little spot, get that flush, get our bolt down in, get this started. Now we can torque this to spec. Torque wrench, bump this to 25. Torque this bolt to an initial 25. Okay, 90 degrees. Back down. 30. 60. 90 degrees. Tensioner's in. Now we're going to slap in our belt. I got this Continental 6PK 1990. Should be the correct belt. First thing first, I like to do the crank pulley. You want to reach down onto the bottom of the crank pulley and make sure that the belt is sitting flush. It has a hard time fitting into behind the harmonic balancer if you don't get your actual hand down there and make sure you tuck it up into that little ridge behind the harmonic balancer. If you have it routed correctly, the belt should sit and fit over the tensioner perfectly with that pin in place. Do one last double check. Check all of your pulleys. I've had a belt sitting off one rib, does the same thing, causes that rib to shred off. It'll start cutting hoses. So just take your time and double check all of the pulleys before you pull the pin and fire the car up. And we look good. Reach down with one hand, pull to the right, pull that pin, release, and the tensioner and belt installation is done. I like to do the mass airflow sensor first so the wire doesn't get in the way, and then just get that hose lined up with the air box, and I like to just give it a push. Now another thing I want to do is I want to get all this oil out of the valve cover. Ed had a spill the other day when he was topping off oil, and there's like a half an inch of engine oil down here on plugs 2 and 3. So we're going to get this evacuated, and I got a new oil filler cap to reseal this gasket just in case it's leaking. Okay, we can install our old gasket, and we have our new oil cap. So we just need to line this notch up with our new notch. Now we're almost ready to fill and bleed the cooling system, but before we do that, it's got an electric water pump. We need to replace that battery. All right, time to start getting this battery ripped out. So this new battery comes with these covers on the post. See this little tab? Rip that off. Okay, this goes in the ground side, because that battery vents through the other side, factory. If the battery is inside space of the vehicle, it has to have a safe way to vent, which is through this tube back here in the corner. Now for these BMW batteries, especially on the E90X body style, you have to register the battery replacement. As these BMW's batteries age, the computer tells the alternator to bump up the voltage regulator, basically, charging it more voltage as the battery gets older. So when we replace it, we have to go into the computer, tell the computer, hey, we got a brand new battery, tell the alternator to chill out. We don't need to overcharge this one, it's brand new. Luckily, I met a guy that works at the BMW dealership the other day at the taco truck. Gave him a call yesterday. I'm like, hey dude, you got ISTA? I need a battery registration done. He's like, yeah, sure, come by, 50 bucks. So once we get the cooling system bled on here, we're gonna take it over there and get the battery registered. But just a note, if you're gonna replace a battery on a newer BMW, you need to replace, or you need to register the new battery. All right, so I got some German blue coolant here, and we're gonna fill up the cooling system. First things first, you want to pull out this bleeder screw. You can just set that safely aside. Next, we're going to fill this until we have coolant come out of that bleeder. All right, we got coolant at the bleeder now, so we can close this. I'm going to pull just a little bit of fluid, and I like to, so it maxes out right there, I like to have it sitting just below max, pretty much to where this is going to be coming up maybe a ½ inch. Okay, so to bleed the cooling system on this N52 E92, what we're going to do is we're going to go inside the car with the key. We're going to go ignition on, defrost, max heat, down to 1 one power level. Next, we're gonna take our foot, put it to the floor. And what that's gonna do after about 10 seconds, that's gonna engage the manual bleed procedure. Now we can go back, and with ignition on, you can see it spraying. That electric water pump is gonna run and circulate and bleed the cooling system naturally. So now we just need to give it a little bit of time. I also had this code come up while I was driving the car home to my shop. 316A, I believe it's like temp sensor high output. We're gonna try to see if we can delete this. Usually comes up either from a battery issue or if there's air inside the cooling system and the sensor reads incorrect. So while that bleeds, we can top off our new brake flush tool with some fresh brake fluid. Also, this Napa battery was 7 years old. That's pretty impressive. You know, 1215 and it's 1222. So that's pretty good for a battery. Okay, the bleed procedure is done. We can put our adapter back on. About 16 psi. We'll just let that sit for a minute. Okay, while we're testing the cooling system, we can get our brake fluid flush adapter installed. A rag to the side and plop this guy down. Take our adapter. Set our adapter on. Put our fitting on. Cool. This is my first time using this, by the way. So we got our pressure gauge here. That should be sufficient. So that's about 24 psi in the bottle. So I couldn't get any shots of the rear because it was just too tight. But here you see brake bottle with the nipple is sitting on the bleeder screw for the front brakes. Just quarter turn that 11 millimeter up top, and until you get nice clean fluid coming out into the bottle. Just start at the rear right, farthest away from the master cylinder, then rear left, then front right, then front left. All right, y'all, brake fluid flush is complete. We got lots of good fluid out of there. The car has been holding cooling system pressure the entire time. We're still at a steady 16 psi, so we can break this off. We can disconnect the brake bleeder, and we are ready to run this puppy. All right, let's pull a scotch of fluid out. We just want to be, you know, half an inch below the max line. We can throw our cap back down. And we are ready to fire this sucker up. Let's go. All right, I'm trying to remember how to reset CBS without looking it up. So I think it's hold on the left odometer. There we go. Then back to the bumper, reset brake fluid flush. Okay. That's reset to 2024. Oil service was never reset, so we're going to do that. Okay, vehicle check, rear brakes, front brakes, brake fluid, all good. All right. Nice. Running good so far. Let's go take a look in the engine bay. So it's running good. A little bit of smoke down by the valve cover, but that's just from me spraying off the oil. Belt's looking good. We'll check the oil filter housing with a mirror. It's just spilt water from the washer fluid. She's running good though. Running real good. So she's running great. We're gonna get a couple panels on here and then we're gonna bring it outside and give it an engine clean and degrease. Let's take this thing for a drive and take this battery core back. All right, y'all, she's pretty well buttoned up. I'm gonna go hit the parts store, get this core back. I'll try to get a shot or two on the way there and back of the vehicle driving, let you see how it runs. All right, y'all, we're pulling onto the freeway. She's running strong. We have 0 lights on the dash. We have 0 service indicators. She's running great. Washers don't work, windshield washers, but we'll fix that next visit. All in all, really happy so far. I'm gonna keep my eyes on the road, but I'll get you a shot on the way back maybe. The core has been dropped off. Next stop, on our way to the BMW dealership. Time to get this battery registered. All right, y'all, the car is registered, battery's registered. We put 12.5 miles on it so far. It's running great. We even got a printout of the fault list from Mista. So shout out to Dylan. Thanks for the help, brother. We're gonna get this thing home, put a last little spit shine on the engine bay, and then we're gonna give Ed a call, get his invoice built up, get him over here to pick up the car. Home stretch, baby. All right, y'all, there you have it. A nice spit shined engine bay. Ready for Ed to come pick it up. I love popping the hood for customers and showing them the detail job that I do with the engine bay when I'm done. So I think Ed's gonna be real happy. Time to go get the invoice built and give him a call. Can't forget the sweetheart Nona. Hi, sweetie. So the next morning I picked Ed up and I brought him back to the shop. We spent about 45 minutes going over the car, showed him all the repairs that I did, all the old parts. We talked about all the key features that I think are important on the N52. We talked BMWs, fishing, boats, all kinds of good stuff. Really just shot the shit. He's such a cool guy. He makes these badass custom canes, spends hours making them, and really nice guy. It was an absolute pleasure to meet him and be able to help him out with his car. I'm by no means trying to open a repair shop, but you know, a chance to help Ed out,
make some cool content for you guys and get a little milk money on the side. It's definitely a win all around. So he was happy, I was happy, and overall it was a really cool experience meeting Ed. As far as what's coming next, we just got brand new LED lights in the shop. I got 2 brand new DISA rebuild kits for both my E46s, and we still got lots of work to go on both E46s as well. So if you've made it this far, thanks again for your support and thanks for watching, and stay tuned for the next video, and I'll see you on my next day off. Cheers.